In this video, we'll be taking a look at void versus non-void methods, as well as static versus non-static methods in Java. And we'll be doing that by creating a temperature converter going from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So let's talk a little bit about void versus non-void before we get to the programming part. So void methods are used when a method does not return a value, while non-void methods do return a value, and we'll be doing that today. When we talk about non-static methods, they're primarily used with an instance of a class, and this means an object. Non-static methods are built to operate on objects. Static methods cannot use the keyword this, which refers to an instance of the class, which we'll cover a little later in much more detail. So basically, for right now, if you're using a method that does not use an object, you would use a static method. If you're using a method that does use an object, you would use a non-static method. All right, so let's jump in, take a look at the requirements for our temperature converter, and then we'll get to programming. So they want us to create a class called temperature, create an instance of temperature called thisTemp1 that has the fields tempf and tempc. Create a method that asks the user to input the current degrees in Fahrenheit, which returns the value, stores it in tempf of our object. Create a separate method that converts the tempf value to Celsius and stores it in tempc of our object. And we have our Celsius formula, which is 5 divided by 9 multiplied by the result of f minus 32. And then we need to create a method that outputs a suitable message showing the original Fahrenheit temperature and the new converted Celsius temperature. So that's what we're going to be doing. So let's flip over to BlueJ and start programming that now. Okay, so we're in BlueJ. We're ready to start programming now. We said we're going to have a method where the user inputs the temperature. And remember, anytime we have user input, we have to import our scanner. And we've gone over how to do that multiple times. And it said we wanted two fields or two attributes of our object. And that was tempf and tempc. So anytime we're creating attributes of our object, we always want to use private. And the first one I'm going to do is tempf. I'm going to have the user use a whole number or assume they're going to enter a whole number. And then tempc, I'm going to make a double data type. And that is because if we're converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius, we may need a decimal, which is a double. So I need to create an instance of the class, create an object, and temperature is the name of my class. So that's the data type. And they wanted us to call it thisTemp1, and that is new temperature. And what this does is, right here, this line or this temperature calls the constructor to construct the object, thisTemp1. And you may be saying, well, I don't see the constructor. And that's because when you haven't overridden a constructor, Java builds this one for you automatically, so you don't actually have to code for it. We need to go ahead and get the Fahrenheit. So we need to create a new method for that. So we're going to use public. Now, because I'm using my object, I don't want to make this static. This is going to return a value. It's going to return an integer. So I have to put the type and then the name, get f. I'm not passing any parameters down. And you'll see that I have an error here. And that's because I haven't returned anything. So what we need to do is we need to use scanner. We're going to do my object, new scanner, and that's going to be system.in. And the reason we have to put this here, and you want to spell scanner correctly, the reason I have put this here instead of my main method is if I put it in my main method, it will only work inside the main method. Well, because the directions said to get the Fahrenheit in a separate method, I have to put my object down here. So then all we're going to do is we're going to output a line that says enter the temperature in Fahrenheit. Now, if you have a number pad, I don't have a number pad on my keyboard, but if you have a number pad on your keyboard, you can hold the Alt key, type in 0176, let go of the Alt key, and you'll get a degree symbol. I don't have a number pad, so I can't do that on mine. Now, return. Once I type in return, the error is gone. And what are we returning? Well, the user is going to type in a value, and that's what I'm going to return. Now I need to store that in my tempf. So all I'm going to go back up here is this temp1.tempf, and I have to do this because I need to access this attribute of this object. And we're going to do this temp1, and we're going to call our method. So that will give me the temperature. Now, the other thing I need to do is I need to convert it to Celsius. So they wanted a separate method for that. And I'm going to return a double data type because it may come out as a decimal. And we're going to do convert C. And what do I need to pass down to this method? I need to pass down Fahrenheit. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up my method and I'm simply going to return. And that is going to be, let's see, it was F minus 32 multiplied by 5 divided by 9. Now we're going to run into a slight issue here, and I'm going to leave this issue just to prove a point. We really need to cast, because what's going to happen is this is going to be an integer, and when I multiply it by 5 divided by 9, it's going to give me an integer rather than a double value, even though I have it returning as a double. It's going to do the calculation and then return it as a double. And it's not going to work properly, and we'll prove that in a minute. Now, I wanted us to store that in temp C, so I have to reference my object, temp C, and I need to call that method. Well, I have to do that because it's a non-static method, so I have to use this temp1, convert C, but then I need to pass a parameter. If I just do this, I'm going to get an error, and that's because this signature down here doesn't match this signature up here. Because I have one parameter inside my parentheses, I need one parameter up here. And I said I'm passing down the degrees Fahrenheit. So that's going to be this temp1 dot temp F. That is where I stored the Fahrenheit temperature in this previous line up here. When I call get Fahrenheit, I store it in temp F, or the temperature Fahrenheit. And because I'm returning a value, I need to have it stored somewhere. And the last thing I need to do is I need to output the temperature. Now, because we're outputting the temperature and it does not return anything, I don't use a data type, I use void, which means we are not gonna return anything. And I'm gonna call this output temp. I'm gonna make a double, because remember, it could be a decimal. And then I'm gonna do final temp, because I need to pass down the final temperature. And what I'm gonna do, so I'm going to do system.out.println, and I'm simply going to say the converted temperature is, and then that's going to be final temp. Okay, so I need to call this method, and then we'll slightly review our code, make sure we understand what it is doing. If we don't understand what it's doing, there's no point in coding. Okay, so let's take a look at our code here. So we created an object, and this object has these attributes, temp F, temp C. This temp1.tempf, what are we storing inside the temp F of our object? Well, we're storing the return value of get F. Down here is get F. We have our scanner, so the user can type in a value, and that's what we are returning. We're returning the value they type in, and that gets stored in temp F. Then temp C, we need to store a value. What are we storing the value of? Well, we're going to call convert C, and we're going to pass down temp F, which we got in the previous line of code. So here's my convert C. This temp1.tempf is going to be represented by the parameter F. We do F minus 32 multiplied by 5 divided by 9, which is not going to come out the way we want it to, which we'll prove in a minute. And then we have this temp1.output temp, and we're passing down the temp C, which converted it to Celsius right down here. And this temp1.temp C is going to be represented by final temp. And that is what we are outputting. And because this does not return a value, we are using the keyword void. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And we're going to say, okay, let's enter the temperature in Fahrenheit. So let's do 212 to see if it works. Comes out to 100.0 in Celsius, which is correct. Now, let's do 100 degrees, just slightly above the average body temperature, which is 98.6 degrees. That should come out to 98.6 degrees is 37 degrees Celsius. If I type in 100, it shouldn't come out to 37 degrees Celsius, and it does, which is not correct. And that is because we need to do what is called casting. I need to cast this value to a double, so when it multiplies this by 0.55, which is going to be a double, it'll work out properly. So all I'm going to do is do casting, and casting will always cast the very next object, or the thing it's next to, not the object, sorry. So the f minus 32 is what is going to be casted to a double. If I put this whole thing in parentheses, that's not going to be helpful, because it's going to run the calculation and then convert it to a double, and that's not what we want. So what we want to do here is we want to cast the f minus 32 to a double, so when we multiply 5 divided by 9, it comes out. So let's compile, and let's run this thing again, and we should see that it comes out right. So we'll do 100, and it comes out to 37 point, and a bunch of 7s, 8, and then an 8. So that is it for this video about static versus non-static methods, as well as void versus non-void. If you have any questions, please post a comment below, and we'll see you guys in the next video.